Welcome back to Disenfranchised, a podcast where we identify disenfranchised grief through the lens of each and every Friends episode. I'm Karen Bulinski Mathison, founder of The Naked Grief and creator of the Disenfranchised podcast. We are now on season 3, so let's jump in it, shall we? This week's episode is season 3. Episode 1, the one with the Princess Leia fantasy. While television audiences in 1996 tuned in for the pop culture novelty of Rachel Green and Princess Leia's iconic gold bikini, a much quieter, heavier emotional undercurrent dominates this episode. Behind the sitcom laughter and bedroom fantasies lies profound grief, invisible emotional labor, and the messy collisions of personal boundaries. Season 3 opens with a jolt of reality. The group walks into Central Perk only to find their sacred couch occupied by strangers. Forced to retreat without their daily anchor, the gang scatters into their respective psychological whirlpools. Monica Geller is entirely unspooled, having broken up with Richard Burke because she wanted children and he did not, because he was a grandpa. Monica is enduring severe, protracted sleep deprivation. She hasn't slept in days, wandering into alternative realities where she believes she works at the Szechuan Dragon. Her grief over losing Richard isn't neatly packaged into a standard sitcom breakup. It manifests as physical exhaustion, disorientation, and a desperate longing for closure that society tells her she shouldn't be feeling after initiating the split herself. Meanwhile, Joey Tribbiani is trapped in his own miniature purgatory. Chandler has reunited with Janice, and Joey's fierce loyalty to Chandler clashes violently with his physical revulsion toward Janice. Elsewhere, Ross and Rachel attempt to deepen their intimacy by sharing secret fantasies, only to have their private world upended by group oversharing. So what makes Monica's grief in this episode so textbook disenfranchised is the societal timeline imposed on breakups. Because Monica chose to end the relationship, friends, family, and cultural norms dictate that she must simply accept her choice and move on. There is no funeral for a breakup, no bereavement leave, and very little social sympathy for someone grieving a healthy relationship terminated solely by life goals. And we saw this even happen when Ross went through his divorce, when Rachel left Barry at the altar. They try to be supportive, but there's only so much you know to do. Her exhaustion is dismissed as mere dramatics until her father, Jack Geller, drops by. Jack inadvertently reveals that Richard is also an absolute wreck, worse off than he was after his divorce. This rare moment of validation provides Monica with the external permission she desperately needed for her grief. Because her grief is valid, it's real, and it's mutual. Only then, knowing that Richard's feeling the loss too, can she finally find closure and fall asleep. Concurrently, Joey experiences a different flavor of disenfranchised strain, unrecognized emotional labor. He bears the silent burden of tolerating Janice to preserve Chandler's happiness, swallowing his visceral disgust because friendship demands a heavy, uncompensated toll. How do the friends handle these underlying emotional states? As usual, kind of poorly, but they are always there for each other, even if they don't offer the exact thing the others need. Phoebe and Rachel operate under a code of absolute radical transparency, believing that everything happening in private couples must be freely exchanged within the female inner circle. When Rachel casually shares Ross's Princess Leia's fantasy with Phoebe, who immediately acts it out with coffee with cinnamon buns in Central Perk, Ross feels violated. His private vulnerability has been weaponized into public comedy. In an attempt to retaliate or regain equilibrium, Ross tries to establish a locker room sharing dynamic with Chandler. Rachel kind of says, friends share. That's what girls do. Why don't you try it? So this well-intentioned bid for male bonding backfires spectacularly. Chandler admits that when he is intimate with a woman, intrusive mental images of his mother inevitably derail his focus. The support system in this episode functions less like a safety net and more like an echo chamber where boundaries constantly dissolve, leading to psychological collateral damage. So some coaching moments and what-if scenarios. If Monica had been met with psychological support rather than well-meaning jokes about getting some Richard, how might her healing process have looked? Grief requires acknowledgement, not rushing. By honoring the magnitude of a life-altering breakup instead of treating it as a scheduling conflict, Monica could have processed her loss with self-compassion weeks earlier. Similarly, consider the what-if for Ross and Rachel. What if privacy had been respected? If Rachel had honored the confidentiality of Ross's fantasy without broadcasting it to the group, Ross wouldn't have felt compelled to seek symmetrical disclosure from Chandler. And if Chandler hadn't inflicted his horrifying maternal mental imagery onto Ross, Ross's long-awaited fantasy might have actually materialized without being psychologically contaminated. But let's go back a little bit to this whole oversharing thing. Because even though Chandler admits the mom coming through while he's being intimate with somebody, he also talks about how cuddling with Janice, his arm falls asleep, and Ross shares the hug and roll. You hug her close, and then you roll her over, and then you can slide your arm out and not have that overheatedness from the body's too close. And when Chandler tries it and can't get his arm out, he flings Janice to the floor. And then he, of course, has to explain what he was trying to do. And then, because women talk, Janice then shares after she sprains her arm with Rachel, he was trying that hug and roll thing. And Rachel says, what hug and roll thing? So then Rachel gets mad at Ross for telling that because she had no idea that that's actually what he did. They would wake up in the morning, not together, but people move in the night. She never thought it was intentional. So again, the oversharing, it can help and it can hurt. So the lesson here is simple. Holding space means respecting boundaries. When we overshare private vulnerabilities without consent, we risk turning intimacy into performance anxiety. So some relatable real-life examples. Viewers watching Friends today recognize these exact dynamics in their own daily lives, or at least they often do. How often do people carry the invisible grief of a breakup they initiated, suffering in silence because society expects them to be strong? How often do friends perform exhausting emotional labor, like smiling through dinners with a partner they despise, simply to keep a social circle from fracturing? Monica's sleep-deprived wandering and Joey's jaw-clenching tolerance of Janice remind audiences that disenfranchised grief and unacknowledged emotional labor are everywhere. Recognizing these hidden struggles is the first step toward true healing. So tune in next time on the disenFRIENDSchised podcast as we unpack the frantic countdown in season 3, episode 2, the one where no one's ready. I remember, just a fun story, I remember reading about this episode in the TV guide, and I am definitely having a hard time with this episode because I promise you, back in the 90s, they said this was the season opener. But it doesn't make sense because you need the Princess Leia one prior to it in order for everything to kind of fall into place. But my memory just isn't the same. So if you had any of this stuff resonate with you, please go to thenakedgrief.com and check out some of the free resources that I have and see if any of those resonate further to help you through whatever disenfranchised grief you may be experiencing. But until next week, stop dismissing your own grief. Honor your boundaries. Again, visit thenakedgrief.com or like and subscribe to the disenFRIENDSchised podcast at YouTube at The Naked Grief to explore more coaching moments and resources. Until next time, stay safe and keep it real. Da 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 da.